What if everything you've been told about personal growth has been backwards? What if the key to becoming who you're meant to be isn't about adding more to your life, but about removing the layers of conditioning that hide your true self? Right now, millions of people are living lives that don't belong to them. They're following scripts written by parents who meant well but didn't understand them. They're chasing dreams that were never theirs to begin with. They're measuring success by standards that have nothing to do with their authentic values. They've become strangers to themselves, wearing masks so convincingly that they've forgotten there's a real face underneath. But here's what most people miss about personal transformation. It's not about becoming someone new. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's not about molding yourself into some ideal version that exists only in your imagination. Real transformation is an archaeological dig. It's about uncovering who you've always been beneath the layers of expectation, conditioning, and fear. It's about remembering rather than becoming. The most fulfilled people on earth haven't invented themselves. They've discovered themselves. They don't waste energy trying to be someone they're not. They don't exhaust themselves maintaining facades that require constant effort. They understand that authenticity isn't a destination you reach through self-improvement. It's a return to the essence that's been there all along. And today, you're going to learn exactly how to begin your own inner revolution. Chapter 1: The Prison of Conditioning. Most people sleepwalk through their entire lives without ever questioning whether the thoughts in their heads are actually their own. Every belief you hold, every reaction you have, every preference you think defines you was installed in your consciousness by someone else. Your parents, your culture, your religion, your education system, your peer groups, and your media consumption have been programming you since before you could speak. And the most insidious part of this programming is that it feels like you. You experience these conditioned responses as your authentic self because you've never known anything different. It's like being born in a prison and never realizing that walls exist because you've never seen beyond them. The bars of your cage are invisible because they're made of beliefs, assumptions, and unconscious patterns that masquerade as truth. But here's the uncomfortable reality that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Almost nothing about how you think, feel, and behave is actually yours. That career path you're pursuing might be your parents' unlived dream. That relationship style you're repeating might be a pattern you absorbed from watching dysfunctional dynamics as a child. That anger that rises so quickly might be an emotional inheritance from a father who never learned to process his own rage. Those insecurities that plague you might be internalized criticisms from teachers, siblings, or bullies that you've now adopted as your inner voice. The science of neuroplasticity reveals just how deeply this conditioning runs. Your brain literally wires itself based on repeated experiences and environmental inputs during crucial developmental periods. Dr. Bruce Lipton's research on epigenetics shows that your environment doesn't just influence your psychology, it actually affects which genes get expressed and which remain dormant. You're not just psychologically conditioned, you're biologically shaped by the world you were raised in. During childhood, your brain operates primarily in theta brainwave states, the same state adults experience during hypnosis. This means that between birth and roughly age 7, you're essentially in a constant state of hypnotic programming. Every message you receive during this period gets downloaded directly into your subconscious without the critical thinking filters that develop later. Your young mind doesn't evaluate whether information is true or false, healthy or toxic, accurate or distorted. It simply absorbs everything and treats it as absolute truth. This is why a child who's repeatedly told they're stupid will struggle with learning, even if they have above average intelligence. It's why someone raised in a household where money was scarce and spoken about with fear will unconsciously sabotage their own financial success as an adult. It's why people who witnessed unhealthy relationship dynamics often find themselves recreating those same patterns despite consciously wanting something different. The subconscious programming runs deeper than conscious intention. But the conditioning doesn't stop in childhood. Throughout your life, you continue to absorb beliefs and patterns from whatever environment you're immersed in. If you spend years in a corporate culture that values productivity over well-being, you'll internalize those values until burnout feels normal. If you're surrounded by cynical people who dismiss dreams as naive, you'll start to see your own aspirations through that same lens of impossibility. If you consume media that constantly generates fear and outrage, your nervous system will calibrate to a baseline of anxiety and defensiveness. The most damaging aspect of conditioning is that it creates what psychologists call the false self. This is the constructed personality you've built to navigate your environment, gain approval, avoid punishment, and fit into the systems you were born into. The false self isn't intentionally deceptive. It's a survival mechanism that develops because your authentic self wasn't safe, acceptable, or valued in your early environment. If expressing anger led to punishment, you learned to suppress it. If showing vulnerability resulted in mockery, you learned to appear invulnerable. If being yourself brought rejection, you learned to become what others wanted. The false self is incredibly convincing because it's been reinforced thousands of times through social feedback. When you behave according to your conditioning, people respond positively. They tell you you're being responsible, mature, realistic, or appropriate. When you deviate from conditioning and express your authentic self, you often encounter resistance, criticism, or rejection. This social reinforcement makes the false self feel like the right way to be, while your authentic impulses feel wrong, selfish, or immature. But here's what you need to understand about this prison of conditioning. It's not actually keeping you safe anymore. The strategies that helped you survive childhood or navigate early adult challenges are now limiting your capacity for genuine fulfillment, creativity, and connection. The mask that once protected you has become a barrier that prevents anyone from seeing or loving the real you. The rules you internalize to gain approval are now preventing you from approving of yourself. Dr. Gabor Mate's work on trauma and authenticity reveals that the loss of connection to your authentic self is itself a form of trauma. When you abandon yourself to fit into systems that don't honor your true nature, you create an internal split that generates anxiety, depression, and a persistent sense that something is fundamentally wrong with your life, even when external circumstances seem fine. This is why so many people achieve conventional success and still feel empty. They've climbed ladders that were leaning against the wrong walls, pursuing goals that were never truly theirs. The prison of conditioning also creates what philosophers call bad faith. This is when you lie to yourself about your own freedom, pretending that you have no choice but to be the person you've become. You tell yourself you have to stay in the soul-crushing job because you need security. You have to maintain the relationship that makes you miserable because you've invested so much time. You have to keep pursuing goals you don't care about because that's what success looks like. But these statements are rarely absolute truths. They're conditioned beliefs that you've accepted without examination. The moment you begin to question your conditioning is the moment your inner revolution begins. This questioning doesn't mean rejecting everything you were taught or rebelling against all authority. It means developing the capacity to examine each belief, value, and pattern with curiosity rather than automatic acceptance. You start asking questions like, is this actually true for me? Does this belief serve my well-being and growth? Am I living this way because I chose it or because I never questioned it? Who would I be without this conditioning? These questions are revolutionary because they introduce the possibility that you're not fixed, that your personality isn't your destiny, and that the life you've been living might not be the only life available to you. They create cracks in the walls of your prison through which light can enter. And once you've seen that light, once you've glimpsed the possibility of living as your authentic self, you can never fully return to unconscious conditioning. The inner revolution has begun, and there's no going back. Only forward toward the self you've always been, but never fully met. Chapter 2. The Architecture of the False Self. To dismantle something, you must first understand how it's constructed. The false self isn't a single mask you wear. It's an elaborate architecture of interconnected beliefs, behaviors, and defense mechanisms that have been built over decades. Understanding this architecture is essential because you can't simply decide to be authentic and expect the false self to dissolve. You have to systematically identify each component, understand its function, and consciously choose whether to keep it or release it. The foundation of the false self is what psychologists call core beliefs. These are the fundamental assumptions you hold about yourself, other people, and how the world works. They typically form in childhood and operate mostly outside of conscious awareness, yet they influence every decision you make and every interpretation you give to your experiences. Common core beliefs include things like, I'm not good enough. I have to be perfect to be loved. The world is dangerous. I can't trust anyone. Or, I have to take care of everyone else before myself. These core beliefs aren't usually stated explicitly in your mind. They operate as background assumptions that shape your perception of reality. If your core belief is that you're not good enough, you'll interpret neutral feedback as criticism, success as luck, and failure as confirmation of your inadequacy. You'll work twice as hard as necessary to prove your worth while never actually feeling worthy. If your core belief is that people can't be trusted, you'll unconsciously test every relationship, looking for evidence of betrayal while missing evidence of genuine care and commitment. The core beliefs create what cognitive psychologists call confirmation bias. You unconsciously seek out and pay attention to information that confirms your existing beliefs while dismissing or not even noticing information that contradicts them. This creates a self-reinforcing loop where your beliefs shape your perception shapes your behavior, and your behavior creates results that confirm your original beliefs. You're trapped in a psychological echo chamber of your own making. Built on top of these core beliefs are your conditional rules for living. These are the if-then statements that govern your behavior. If I'm productive enough, then I'll be valuable. If I avoid conflict, then I'll be safe. If I'm always helping others, then I'll be worthy of love. If I maintain control, then nothing bad will happen. These conditional rules create the strategies you use to navigate life, but they also create enormous stress because you're constantly trying to meet impossible conditions. You can never be productive enough, helpful enough, perfect enough, or in control enough to feel fundamentally secure. The conditions keep shifting, and you exhaust yourself trying to meet them. These rules also create what psychotherapist Karen Horney called the tyranny of the shoulds. You develop rigid ideas about how you should be, what you should want, how you should feel, and what you should accomplish. These shoulds become internal dictators that judge every aspect of your experience. You should be further along by now. You should be grateful instead of disappointed. You should want what everyone else wants. You should be able to handle this without struggling. The constant gap between who you are and who you should be generates shame, anxiety, and exhaustion. The next layer of the false self-architecture consists of your persona and defense mechanisms. The persona is the social mask you present to the world, the carefully curated version of yourself that you believe will be acceptable, admirable, or at least safe from rejection. Defense mechanisms are the psychological strategies you use to protect yourself from emotional pain, maintain your persona, and avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself or your life. Common defense mechanisms include denial, refusing to acknowledge painful realities, rationalization, creating logical-sounding explanations for behavior that's actually driven by unconscious needs or fears, projection, attributing your own unacceptable thoughts or feelings to other people, displacement, redirecting emotions from their actual source to a safer target, and intellectualization, analyzing situations from a detached academic perspective to avoid feeling the emotions they generate. These defense mechanisms aren't character flaws. They're intelligent adaptations that helped you survive emotionally overwhelming situations. The problem is that they continue operating long after the original threat has passed, and they prevent you from experiencing life directly. You're constantly mediating your experience through layers of psychological protection that keep you from knowing what you actually think, feel, and want. Beneath the defense mechanisms lies what Carl Jung called the shadow. This is the repository of all the parts of yourself that you've deemed unacceptable and tried to disown or suppress. Your anger, your selfishness, your sexuality, your ambition, your laziness, your jealousy, your neediness. Whatever aspects of human nature you learned were shameful or dangerous get pushed into the shadow where they continue to influence your behavior in unconscious ways. The shadow is paradoxical. The more you try to suppress or deny certain aspects of yourself, the more power they have over you. The person who insists they never get angry often has explosive rage that erupts unexpectedly. The person who prides themselves on being selfless often manipulates others through guilt and martyrdom. The person who maintains a facade of perfect confidence often struggles with debilitating self-doubt that they hide from everyone. Psychologist Robert Augustus Masters explains that the shadow doesn't just contain negative qualities. It also holds positive aspects of yourself that you've disowned because they felt too threatening or didn't fit your conditioning. If you grew up in an environment where standing out was dangerous, your natural confidence and charisma might be in your shadow. If you were taught that wanting things for yourself was selfish, your healthy ambition and desire might be suppressed. If creativity wasn't valued in your family system, your artistic impulses might feel shameful or indulgent. The final layer of the false self-architecture is your life script. This is the unconscious narrative you're living out, often based on decisions you made in childhood about who you are and how your life will unfold. Transactional analysis, developed by Eric Berne, reveals that people often operate from scripts like, "I'll never amount to anything," "I have to struggle to succeed," "I can't have what I really want," or "I'll be abandoned by people I love." These scripts play out like self-fulfilling prophecies because you unconsciously make choices that confirm the script. If your script says success requires struggle, you'll unconsciously create obstacles and complications even when easier paths are available. If your script says you'll be abandoned, you'll either choose unavailable partners or push away people who actually want to stay. If your script says you're destined to fail, you'll sabotage yourself right before achieving significant goals. Understanding the architecture of your false self is crucial because it reveals that you're not fundamentally flawed or broken. You're operating from an incredibly sophisticated but ultimately limiting system that made sense given your early environment and the information you had available. Every component of your false self was once adaptive and protective. The problem isn't that you developed these strategies. The problem is that you've outgrown them, but haven't updated your internal operating system. The inner revolution requires systematically examining each layer of your false self with compassion and curiosity. Not to judge yourself for having these patterns, but to understand them clearly enough that you can begin to choose differently. You're not trying to destroy the false self violently. You're gently dismantling it piece by piece, while simultaneously allowing your authentic self to emerge from underneath. Chapter 3. The Call to Authenticity. There comes a moment in many people's lives when the false self can no longer be maintained. Something breaks through the conditioning, the personas, and the defense mechanisms, and you get a glimpse of a more authentic way of being. This moment often arrives during a crisis, a loss, a moment of unexpected clarity, or through the accumulation of years of vague dissatisfaction that suddenly becomes unbearable. Psychologists call this the crisis of authenticity, and it's one of the most important and challenging transitions a human being can experience. The call to authenticity often begins as a whisper, a persistent feeling that something is off, even though your life looks fine on paper. A sense of going through the motions without genuine engagement or enthusiasm. A growing awareness that you're performing a version of yourself rather than actually being yourself. A feeling of disconnection, even when surrounded by people who supposedly know you. These are the early signals that your authentic self is trying to get your attention, that the life you've been living no longer fits who you're becoming. Many people ignore these whispers for years or even decades. They distract themselves with busyness, numb themselves with substances or screens, or convince themselves that everyone feels this way and that expecting more from life is unrealistic or selfish. But the call to authenticity doesn't go away when ignored. It gets louder. What begins as vague dissatisfaction often escalates into anxiety, depression, physical symptoms, or life circumstances that force you to stop and pay attention. Your body might develop chronic pain or illness that slows you down and forces you to examine how you've been living. Your relationships might break down, revealing that you've been connecting through masks rather than genuine intimacy. Your career might become unbearable, making it impossible to continue pretending you care about work that doesn't align with your values. These aren't punishments or failures. They're your authentic self's increasingly desperate attempts to break through the prison of conditioning and false identity. Dr. James Hollis, a Jungian analyst, describes midlife crisis not as a problem to be solved, but as a summons to depth. It's your psyche's way of saying that the first half of life, which was necessarily focused on adapting to external expectations and building a functional personality, must give way to a second half focused on discovering and expressing your authentic nature. This transition isn't optional if you want to live a meaningful life. You either answer the call to authenticity, or you spend the rest of your life maintaining an increasingly hollow existence that requires more and more energy to sustain. The call to authenticity is inherently disruptive because authenticity often conflicts with the life you've already built. The career you spent years developing might not align with your authentic interests and values. The relationship you committed to might have been based on who you thought you should be, rather than who you actually are. The community you belong to might expect you to remain the person they've always known, rather than supporting your evolution into someone new. This is why many people resist the call to authenticity even when they recognize it. Answering it often requires releasing aspects of your life that provide security, identity, and belonging. It means risking disapproval from people whose opinions you've always valued. It means tolerating uncertainty about who you'll become and what your life will look like. It means choosing unknown authenticity over familiar inauthenticity, which goes against every instinct for safety and predictability. But here's what you need to understand about resisting this call. The cost of maintaining the false self only increases over time. What required a little effort and compromise in your 20s might require enormous energy and suppression in your 40s. What generated mild dissatisfaction early on might create profound depression or existential despair later. What cost you some aliveness initially might eventually cost you your physical health, your relationships, and any sense of meaning or purpose. The call to authenticity also intensifies because your authentic self isn't content to remain hidden forever. It will keep pushing against the constraints of your conditioning through symptoms, synchronicities, and situations that force you to confront the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are. The dreams you dismissed might keep returning in different forms. The creative impulses you suppressed might emerge as restlessness and frustration. The truth you've been avoiding might present itself through other people who mirror back aspects of yourself you haven't acknowledged. Answering the call to authenticity requires enormous courage because it means stepping into unknown territory without guarantees. You don't know who you'll be without your familiar patterns and identities. You don't know whether you'll be accepted when you show up authentically. You don't know whether the life you create from authenticity will provide the security and success that your conditioned life promised. You're essentially choosing to jump off a cliff while trusting that you'll discover your wings on the way down. But this leap into authenticity is also where life truly begins. Every person who has made this journey reports that despite the challenges and uncertainties, they would never go back to living inauthentically. They describe finally feeling at home in themselves, experiencing a coherence between their inner experience and outer expression, and accessing energy creativity, and joy that were impossible when they were maintaining the false self. The authentic life might not look impressive by conventional standards, but it feels genuinely yours in a way that the conditioned life never did. The call to authenticity isn't asking you to become someone else. It's inviting you to stop being everyone else and finally become yourself. It's not about achieving some ideal or perfected version of who you could be. It's about relaxing into who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning and protection. This is the heart of the inner revolution. Not a violent overthrow of everything you've been, but a gentle return to everything you are. Chapter 4. The Courage to See Yourself Clearly. The inner revolution cannot begin without radical self-honesty. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire journey because human beings are remarkably skilled at self-deception. We create elaborate stories about who we are, why we do what we do, and what we really want. These stories often bear little resemblance to reality, but we defend them fiercely because acknowledging the truth would require changing in ways that feel threatening or uncomfortable. Radical self-honesty means looking at yourself without the filters of justification, rationalization, or blame. It means acknowledging your actual motivations rather than your stated ones. It means admitting to fears, desires, and patterns that don't fit your self-image. It means seeing how you've contributed to the very situations you claim are happening to you. This level of honesty is rare because it's inherently humbling and often painful. Most people's self-perception is dramatically biased in their own favor. Research by psychologists like Emily Pronin shows that people consistently rate themselves as less biased, more ethical, more self-aware, and more objective than others. We see our own negative behaviors as justified by circumstances while judging others' similar behaviors as character flaws. We remember our contributions to relationships and projects while forgetting others' contributions. We interpret ambiguous situations in ways that confirm our existing self-image while dismissing evidence that contradicts it. This self-serving bias isn't conscious dishonesty. It's how your ego protects itself from information that would threaten your self-concept. But it also keeps you trapped in patterns because you can't change what you won't acknowledge. If you believe your relationship problems are entirely caused by your partner's issues, you'll never examine your own contribution. If you attribute your career stagnation entirely to external obstacles, you'll never address your own self-sabotage. If you see yourself as a victim of circumstances beyond your control, you'll never claim your power to create change. Radical self-honesty begins with examining your self-justifying stories. Every time you find yourself explaining why you had to behave a certain way, why you can't do something you claim to want, or why your situation is different from others' similar situations, you're probably engaged in self-justification rather than self-honesty. These explanations aren't necessarily false, but they're often incomplete. They emphasize the factors that make you look good or blameless while minimizing your agency and responsibility. A more honest examination might reveal that yes, external obstacles exist, and you've also been avoiding taking action that would address them. Yes, another person contributed to a conflict, and you also responded in ways that escalated rather than resolved it. Yes, your childhood created challenges, and you're also using those challenges as an excuse not to grow. The practice of radical self-honesty requires what Buddhists call bare attention. This is the capacity to observe your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without immediately overlaying them with interpretation, judgment, or story. You simply notice what's actually happening in your internal experience and your behavior without rushing to explain it away or make it mean something that protects your ego. For example, instead of immediately justifying why you snapped at someone by focusing on what they did to provoke you, you might simply notice, I felt threatened and responded with aggression. Instead of creating an elaborate explanation for why you didn't follow through on your commitment, you might simply acknowledge, I was afraid and avoided doing what I said I would do. This kind of simple, direct honesty cuts through layers of self-deception and creates the foundation for genuine change. One of the most powerful tools for developing radical self-honesty is examining the gap between your stated values and your actual behavior. Most people claim to value things like health, relationships, growth, creativity, or contribution. Yet their daily actions reveal very different priorities. You say you value health, but consistently sacrifice sleep, eat poorly, and avoid exercise. You say you value relationships, but spend most of your time working or scrolling through screens. You say you value growth, but avoid challenges that would stretch you. This gap between stated values and lived values reveals where you're lying to yourself about what actually matters to you. The truth isn't found in what you say you care about. It's found in how you spend your time, energy, and attention. If you want to know what someone truly values, don't listen to their words. Watch their behavior over time. The same applies to yourself. Your calendar and your bank statement reveal your real priorities far more accurately than your self-concept does. Radical self-honesty also requires examining what psychologists call secondary gains. These are the hidden benefits you receive from problems and patterns you claim to want to change. You might complain about being stuck in your career, but being stuck also protects you from the risk of failure if you pursued what you really want. You might say you want a relationship, but staying single also protects you from the vulnerability and potential hurt that comes with intimacy. You might claim to want to heal from past trauma, but identifying as damaged provides a convenient explanation for not taking risks or pushing yourself. These secondary gains aren't character flaws. They're evidence of the sophisticated ways your psyche tries to keep you safe. But recognizing them is essential because you can't release a pattern while you're still unconsciously benefiting from it. Another dimension of radical self-honesty involves acknowledging your shadow material, the parts of yourself you've disowned and project onto others. The qualities you most judge in other people are often aspects of yourself that you haven't integrated. If you're intensely bothered by others' selfishness, there's probably selfishness in your own shadow that you refuse to acknowledge. If you're contemptuous of people who are weak or needy, you've likely suppressed your own vulnerability. If you're triggered by others' anger, you probably have unexpressed rage. This doesn't mean that the behaviors you judge aren't actually problematic. It means that the intensity of your reaction is often proportional to how much you're denying the same quality in yourself. Psychologist Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The people who trigger you most are often your greatest teachers because they're showing you your own shadow. Developing radical self-honesty is uncomfortable because it requires releasing the comforting stories you've been telling yourself about why your life is the way it is. You have to acknowledge that you've had more choice than you've been admitting, that you've been complicit in creating circumstances you claim to be victimized by, that the obstacles you've blamed for your lack of progress might be less significant than the internal resistance you haven't addressed. This acknowledgement can initially feel terrible because it means you can't blame external circumstances anymore. But it's also profoundly liberating because it reveals that you have far more power to create change than you realized. If you're part of the problem, you can be part of the solution. This is where the inner revolution gains momentum. Not through understanding theories or learning techniques, but through the simple, difficult practice of seeing yourself clearly without the distortions of self-deception. Chapter 5. Deconstructing your life story. Your life isn't what happened to you. It's the story you tell yourself about what happened to you. This distinction is crucial because most people confuse events with their interpretations of events, believing that their narrative is objective truth rather than one possible interpretation among many. The story you tell about your life determines what you believe is possible, what you feel you deserve, and how you show up in the world. And most people are living stories that were written unconsciously, based on limited information during moments of pain, confusion, or overwhelm. Think about the major events of your life, the relationships that ended, the opportunities you missed, the failures you experienced, the successes you achieved. None of these events have inherent meaning. Meaning is something you assign to them through the story you create. A relationship ending could mean you're fundamentally unlovable, or it could mean you and another person weren't compatible. A business failure could mean you're incompetent, or it could mean you learned valuable lessons while taking a courageous risk. Losing a job could mean you're inadequate, or it could mean you're being redirected towards something more aligned with your authentic path. The events are neutral. Your story gives them significance. The problem is that most people create their life stories during their most vulnerable moments without conscious awareness or choice. When something painful happens, your mind immediately searches for meaning to make sense of the experience and protect you from future pain. A child whose parents divorce might create the story, "Relationships don't last," or "I wasn't important enough to keep the family together." A teenager who gets rejected might decide, "I'm not attractive," or "being myself leads to rejection." A young adult whose business fails might conclude, "I'm not entrepreneurial," or "success isn't meant for people like me." These stories form quickly, often without examination, and then operate as unconscious beliefs that shape every subsequent experience. Narrative therapy, developed by Michael White and David Epstein, reveals that people aren't their problems. People are people, and problems are problems. But when you create a life story where problems become your identity, you become trapped in patterns that feel permanent. The story, "I'm someone with anxiety," is very different from "I'm someone who sometimes experiences anxiety." The first makes anxiety part of your fundamental identity. The second recognizes it as a temporary state that you experience. This seemingly small distinction has enormous implications for your capacity to change. Deconstructing your life story requires examining the narrative you've been living and questioning its accuracy, completeness, and usefulness. You start by identifying the central themes of your story. Are you the victim of circumstances beyond your control? The hero who overcomes obstacles through sheer determination? The person who never gets what they really want? The one who has to struggle for everything while others have it easy? The person who sacrifices their own needs for others? The underdog who proves doubters wrong? These narrative themes aren't just abstract ideas. They actively shape your perception and behavior. If your story is, "I'm a victim," you'll unconsciously look for evidence of victimization while missing opportunities for agency. If your story is, "I have to struggle," you'll create difficulty even when easier paths are available. If your story is, "I'm the one who rescues others," you'll attract people who need rescuing while avoiding relationships of genuine mutuality. Once you've identified your narrative themes, the next step is examining the evidence you've been using to support them. This is where things get interesting, because you'll discover that you've been highly selective in what you remember and emphasize. Your story includes the events that confirm your narrative while conveniently forgetting or minimizing events that contradict it. If your story is that you always fail, you'll remember every failure in vivid detail while dismissing successes as luck or flukes. If your story is that people abandon you, you'll recall every relationship that ended while overlooking the people who've remained consistently present in your life. This selective memory isn't conscious manipulation. It's confirmation bias operating automatically to maintain narrative coherence. Your brain prefers a consistent story, even a painful one, over the cognitive dissonance of contradictory evidence. Deconstructing your story requires actively looking for exceptions and contradictions. When were the times your story wasn't true? What experiences don't fit your narrative? What alternative interpretations might be equally valid? This process often reveals that your story is based on a much smaller data set than you realized. A few painful experiences in adolescence might have created a narrative that you've carried for decades, filtering all subsequent experiences through that original interpretation. You've been living as if those early conclusions represent ultimate truth when they were actually just one possible meaning you could have assigned. Another crucial aspect of deconstruction is examining whose voice is telling your story. When you narrate your life, whose language are you using? Whose judgments are you applying? Whose standards are you measuring yourself against? Often, people discover that their internal narrator sounds suspiciously like a critical parent, a demanding teacher, or a culture that valued conformity over authenticity. The story isn't even yours. It's a hand-me-down narrative that you've been reciting without questioning its origin or accuracy. Reclaiming authorship of your story means consciously choosing what to emphasize, what meaning to assign to events, and what possibilities to focus on going forward. This isn't about creating a false positive narrative or engaging in spiritual bypassing. It's about recognizing that since all narratives are constructed, you might as well construct one that serves your growth and well-being, rather than one that keeps you stuck in limiting patterns. A powerful technique for story reconstruction is called reauthoring. This involves literally rewriting your life story from different perspectives and with different emphasis. What if you told your story focusing on moments of courage rather than moments of failure? What if you emphasized times you showed resilience rather than times you got hurt? What if you interpreted challenges as preparation rather than punishment? Again, this isn't about denying reality or pretending difficult things didn't happen. It's about choosing which aspects of your complex, multifaceted life experience to center in your narrative. The story you're currently telling isn't the only true story available to you. It's simply the one you've been repeating. Chapter 6. The body knows what the mind denies. While your mind can construct elaborate stories and maintain convincing facades, your body tells the truth. Every suppressed emotion, every unacknowledged need, every incongruence between your authentic self and your performed self registers in your physical body. The tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, the chronic pain in your back, the digestive issues that won't resolve. These aren't just physical problems requiring physical solutions. They're your body's way of communicating what your mind refuses to acknowledge. The inner revolution requires learning to listen to your body's wisdom and recognizing that embodiment is the bridge between psychological understanding and actual transformation. Western culture has created a false separation between mind and body, treating them as distinct entities rather than an integrated system. This Cartesian split allows people to intellectually understand their patterns while remaining completely disconnected from their felt experience. You can talk about your feelings without actually feeling them. You can acknowledge trauma without experiencing the sensations associated with it. You can commit to change while your body remains locked in the same protective patterns. This is why so much therapy and self-help fails to create lasting transformation. It addresses the mind while ignoring the body where patterns are actually stored and maintained. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research demonstrates that trauma isn't just stored in memory. It's encoded in your nervous system, your musculature, and your physiological responses. When something overwhelming happens, if you can't fight or flee, your body freezes, and that frozen energy remains stuck in your system. This creates chronic patterns of tension, restricted breathing, and nervous system dysregulation that persist long after the original event has passed. Your body is essentially still responding to threats that no longer exist, remaining in a state of protective vigilance that exhausts your resources and limits your capacity for presence and aliveness. But it's not just trauma that the body holds. Every emotion you've suppressed, every truth you've denied, every impulse you've controlled creates a physical signature. When you're angry but can't express it, that anger doesn't disappear. It gets stored as tension in your jaw, your neck, your shoulders. When you're sad but don't allow yourself to cry, that grief becomes a weight in your chest, a heaviness that you carry everywhere. When you're scared but force yourself to appear confident, that fear lodges in your belly, creating digestive issues and a constant low-level anxiety. Your body becomes a museum of unexperienced emotions, each one creating its own pattern of holding and restriction. The language your body speaks is sensation, not thoughts or words, but the actual felt experience of tension, pressure, temperature, tingling, heaviness, lightness, openness, constriction. Most people are completely disconnected from this language. They live primarily in their heads, aware of thoughts and to some degree emotions, but almost entirely numb to the sensations in their bodies. This disconnection isn't accidental. It's a protective mechanism that develops when experiencing your body fully would mean feeling pain, fear, or other emotions that seemed intolerable at the time. You learn to dissociate from your body as a survival strategy, and now that dissociation has become your default state. Reconnecting with your body begins with something deceptively simple: noticing sensation without trying to change it. This is harder than it sounds because most people immediately want to fix, release, or get rid of uncomfortable sensations. But the first step is simply learning to be with what's there. You might start by bringing attention to your feet, noticing the sensation of contact with the floor, the temperature, any tingling or pressure. Then gradually move your attention up through your body, simply observing what you notice without judgment or agenda. This practice, called body scanning, begins to rebuild the connection between your conscious awareness and your physical experience. As you develop this awareness, you'll start to notice patterns. Your chest tightens when you're about to speak your truth. Your stomach clenches when you're around certain people. Your shoulders rise when you're stressed. Your breath becomes shallow when you're afraid. These patterns are incredibly informative because they reveal your authentic responses before your mind has a chance to rationalize, justify, or suppress them. Your body knows when something isn't right for you, even when your mind is trying to convince you it's fine. Your body knows when you're betraying yourself, even when you're successfully maintaining the appearance of being okay. One of the most powerful aspects of somatic awareness is recognizing how your body maintains your false self through chronic muscular tension. Wilhelm Reich, a student of Freud, developed the concept of character armor, patterns of chronic muscular tension that develop to suppress unwanted impulses and emotions. If you had to suppress anger as a child, you might develop chronic tension in your jaw and shoulders that literally armors you against feeling and expressing that anger. If you had to appear happy when you were actually sad, you might develop a frozen smile, a facial tension that maintains a pleasant expression even when you're suffering inside. This character armor doesn't just suppress emotions, it literally shapes your personality and your experience of life. When you're chronically armored, you can't fully relax, can't breathe deeply, can't feel pleasure intensely, can't express yourself authentically. The armor that once protected you has become a prison that limits your capacity for aliveness. And because these patterns are completely unconscious and have been maintained for years or decades, they feel normal. You don't realize you're living in a contracted state because you've never experienced the expansion that becomes possible when the armor releases. Releasing somatic patterns isn't just about relaxation or stress relief. It's about allowing your body to complete responses that were interrupted during overwhelming experiences. Dr. Peter Levine's work on trauma shows that animals in the wild don't develop PTSD because they allow their bodies to discharge survival energy through shaking, trembling, and completing fight-or-flight responses. Humans, however, often suppress these natural discharge mechanisms because we're told to calm down, be still, and get ourselves under control. This leaves the survival energy stuck in our systems, creating chronic activation and the whole range of symptoms associated with unresolved trauma. When you begin to work somatically, you might notice spontaneous shaking, trembling, crying, or other discharge phenomena. These aren't breakdowns, they're breakthroughs. Your body is finally getting to complete processes that were interrupted years or decades ago. This discharge is often accompanied by profound emotional release as the feelings that were frozen, along with the physical response, finally get to move through and complete. This is true healing, not just understanding what happened to you intellectually, but allowing your body to process and integrate the experience so it no longer controls your present moment reality. Another crucial aspect of embodiment is learning to use your body as a compass for decision-making. Your body knows what's true for you before your mind does. When you're considering an option that aligns with your authentic self, you'll often feel a sense of expansion, ease, or yes in your body. When you're considering something that requires betraying yourself or forcing yourself into a shape that doesn't fit, you'll often feel contraction, heaviness, or resistance. Learning to read these signals and trust them over your mental analysis is a profound shift that allows you to navigate life from authenticity rather than conditioning. This doesn't mean that every difficult feeling is a sign to avoid something. Sometimes growth requires doing things that create temporary discomfort. The key is learning to distinguish between the discomfort of growth, which has a quality of aliveness and challenge to it, and the discomfort of self-betrayal, which has a quality of deadness and resignation. Your body knows the difference, even when your mind tries to confuse them. Integrating your body into your inner revolution also means attending to basic physiological needs that profoundly affect your psychological state. Sleep, nutrition, movement, and breath are not separate from your emotional and spiritual well-being. They're the foundation upon which everything else is built. When you're chronically sleep-deprived, undernourished, sedentary, or breathing shallowly, your nervous system remains in a state of stress that makes authentic living nearly impossible. The inner revolution isn't just a psychological or spiritual process. It's an embodied transformation that requires you to inhabit your body fully, listen to its wisdom, release its holdings, and honor its needs. Your body isn't just a vehicle carrying around your mind. It's the very ground of your existence, the instrument through which you experience life, and the repository of wisdom that your thinking mind often overrides. Learning to live from your body rather than just from your head is one of the most profound shifts you can make in your journey toward authenticity. Chapter 7. The Social Dimension. Authenticity in relationships. The inner revolution doesn't happen in isolation. You discover and express your authentic self primarily through relationships with other people. But here's the paradox. The same relationships that could be vehicles for your liberation are often the greatest obstacles to it. Most people are so deeply conditioned to perform, please, and conform in relationships that they've never experienced genuine intimacy. They connect mask to mask, role to role, need to need, but rarely self to self. Transforming your relationships from performance to authenticity is one of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of the inner revolution. From birth, you learn to modify your authentic expression to maintain connection with your caregivers. Babies are born with spontaneous, unfiltered expression of their needs and feelings. But if that authentic expression consistently results in neglect, punishment, or withdrawal of love, children quickly learn to suppress their true selves and present whatever version gets their needs met. This isn't a conscious choice. It's an unconscious survival strategy that becomes deeply embedded in your relational patterns. You learn that authenticity threatens connection, so you sacrifice authenticity to preserve relationships. This conditioning creates what psychologists call the attachment dilemma. You need connection for survival and well-being, but maintaining connection seems to require abandoning your authentic self. You develop a fundamental belief that you can have connection or authenticity, but not both. This belief operates unconsciously in most of your adult relationships, causing you to automatically suppress parts of yourself that you fear might threaten the connection. You don't even realize you're doing it because it's so automatic and has been operating for so long. The result is that most people have never experienced a relationship where they're fully themselves and fully connected simultaneously. They've experienced pseudo-intimacy, where both people are performing acceptable versions of themselves and calling it closeness. Or they've experienced authentic expression that resulted in conflict and disconnection, confirming their fear that being real destroys relationships. What they haven't experienced is the profound intimacy that becomes possible when two people risk being fully themselves and fully present with each other. Bringing authenticity to relationships requires first understanding your attachment patterns. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, reveals that your early experiences with caregivers create templates for how you relate to others throughout life. If your caregivers were consistently responsive and attuned, you likely developed secure attachment, a capacity to be intimate without losing yourself and autonomous without losing connection. But if your early experiences were inconsistent, neglectful, or intrusive, you likely developed insecure attachment patterns that continue to play out in your adult relationships. Anxious attachment develops when caregivers were inconsistently available, creating a pattern of seeking constant reassurance and fearing abandonment. People with anxious attachment often sacrifice their own needs and authenticity to maintain relationships, becoming hypervigilant to their partner's moods and preemptively adjusting themselves to prevent disconnection. Avoidant attachment develops when emotional expression was dismissed or punished, creating a pattern of maintaining distance and self-sufficiency. People with avoidant attachment often prioritize autonomy over intimacy and feel suffocated by others' emotional needs or by their own vulnerability. These patterns aren't just ideas. They're deeply embodied nervous system responses that activate automatically in relationships. When you understand your attachment pattern, you can begin to recognize when you're responding from conditioning rather than from your authentic, present moment experience. You might notice that you're frantically trying to please someone not because you genuinely want to, but because your anxious attachment is activated and you're trying to prevent perceived abandonment. Or you might notice that you're withdrawing and becoming dismissive not because the relationship is actually problematic, but because your avoidant attachment is triggered and you're protecting yourself from vulnerability. Bringing authenticity to relationships means gradually learning to risk being yourself, even when your conditioning screams that it's dangerous. This doesn't mean dumping every thought and feeling on others without consideration. It means consciously choosing to share your authentic experience in ways that invite connection rather than create distance. It means expressing needs clearly rather than hoping others will read your mind. It means setting boundaries that protect your well-being rather than contorting yourself to accommodate others. It means being willing to disappoint people when your authentic response conflicts with their expectations. This is terrifying for most people because it activates their deepest fear, that their authentic self is unacceptable and will result in rejection or abandonment. But here's what you must understand. Relationships built on your false self are already a form of abandonment. You're abandoning yourself to maintain connection with others. And that connection is hollow because no one actually knows you. They know the performance you've been maintaining. When you risk authenticity, you create the possibility for genuine intimacy where you're known and loved for who you actually are, rather than for who you're pretending to be. This doesn't mean all your relationships will survive your commitment to authenticity. Some won't. Relationships that were based on your compliance, your role as a rescuer, or your willingness to suppress yourself will often end or transform dramatically when you start showing up authentically. This is painful, but necessary. These relationships were preventing your growth, and their ending creates space for connections that can actually support your authentic self. The people who are meant to be in your life will meet your authenticity with curiosity and respect, even when it challenges them. The people who can't tolerate your authenticity are revealing that the relationship was conditional on your continued self-betrayal. One of the most challenging aspects of relational authenticity is learning to communicate from your experience rather than from judgment or blame. Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication provides a framework for this. Instead of saying, "You never listen to me," which is a judgment that will likely trigger defensiveness, you might say, "When you look at your phone while I'm talking, I feel unimportant, and I need to feel valued in our conversations." This shifts from blame to vulnerability, from attacking the other person to revealing your authentic experience. This kind of communication is risky because it requires showing your vulnerability, your needs, and your feelings without knowing how the other person will respond. Your conditioning probably taught you that vulnerability is weakness and that expressing needs is selfish or needy. But authentic relationships require this vulnerability. Without it, you remain in transactional exchanges where both people are protecting themselves rather than genuinely connecting. Authenticity in relationships also means allowing others to be authentic, even when their authenticity is uncomfortable for you. If you demand that others suppress their truth to make you comfortable, you're perpetuating the same conditioning that prevented your own authenticity. Real intimacy requires creating space where both people can be fully themselves, which sometimes means sitting with discomfort when your partner expresses feelings or needs that challenge you. This mutual authenticity creates what relationship researcher John Gottman calls emotional attunement. Both people are genuinely present with each other's experience rather than defending, explaining, or trying to fix. You can listen to your partner express disappointment without immediately becoming defensive or trying to talk them out of their feeling. You can share your needs without demanding that your partner immediately meet them or feeling devastated if they can't. This kind of mature relating is rare because it requires that both people have done enough inner work to remain grounded in themselves while remaining open to the other. Chapter 8. The Creative Imperative. Living as Self-Expression. One of the clearest indicators that you're living from your authentic self rather than your conditioned false self is the presence of creativity in your life. Not necessarily artistic creativity, though it might include that, but creativity in the broader sense of bringing something new into existence that expresses your unique way of seeing and being in the world. When you're living from conditioning, you're essentially recycling patterns that were installed in you by others. When you're living authentically, you become a creative force, generating responses and expressions that are genuinely yours. The false self is fundamentally uncreative because it operates from templates and scripts. It knows how things should be done, what's acceptable, what's safe, and what will be approved. It follows rules, meets expectations, and stays within known boundaries. This produces competence and predictability, but it doesn't produce anything genuinely new or personally meaningful. The authentic self, in contrast, is inherently creative because it's responding to life freshly, rather than through predetermined patterns. It doesn't know how things should be done. It discovers how things want to be done through experimentation and authentic engagement. Many people have confused creativity with artistic talent, believing that if they can't paint, write, or play music well, they're not creative. But this is a profound misunderstanding. Creativity isn't about producing art that meets certain standards. It's about expressing your unique perspective and bringing something into existence that wouldn't exist without you. The way you solve problems, the way you approach relationships, the way you organize your life, the way you respond to challenges, all of these can be creative acts if they're coming from your authentic self rather than from conditioning. Dr. Abraham Maslow's research on self-actualization revealed that the most psychologically healthy and fulfilled people share certain characteristics, and one of the most prominent is what he called creativeness. Not creativity in the specialized sense of producing art, but creativity as a way of approaching life. Self-actualizing people see possibilities where others see obstacles. They create novel solutions because they're not limited to conventional thinking. They express themselves authentically in ways that are fresh and spontaneous rather than rehearsed and predictable. The suppression of creativity is actually a suppression of your authentic self. When children are punished or shamed for thinking differently, expressing themselves uniquely, or doing things in non-standard ways, they learn that creativity is dangerous. They learn that the safe path is to follow instructions, color inside the lines, and reproduce what others have already done. This is necessary to some degree for social functioning, but when it becomes total, it creates adults who are deeply disconnected from their creative essence and therefore from their authentic selves. Reclaiming your creativity is central to the inner revolution because it's through creative expression that you discover and develop your authentic voice. When you write, paint, dance, build, cook, or engage in any creative process without worrying about whether it's good enough or whether others will approve, you access aspects of yourself that are typically suppressed in daily life. You enter what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, a state where self-consciousness disappears and you're fully absorbed in what you're doing. This flow state is actually a state of authenticity. You're not monitoring yourself or performing for an audience. You're simply being and expressing. The creative process also teaches you to tolerate uncertainty and embrace experimentation, both of which are essential for authentic living. When you're creating something, you don't know how it will turn out. You have to make choices without certainty, try things that might not work, and revise based on what emerges. This is exactly how authentic living works. You can't know in advance how your life will unfold when you start being yourself. You have to experiment, make choices based on your authentic impulses rather than guaranteed outcomes, and adjust based on what you discover. Many people resist creative expression because they're terrified of judgment. They've internalized critical voices that immediately evaluate anything they produce as not good enough. But these critical voices aren't actually about the quality of your creative work. They're about the danger of being seen. Creativity makes you visible in ways that following templates doesn't. When you express yourself authentically, you're revealing something that's genuinely yours, and that makes you vulnerable to rejection in a way that conforming doesn't. This fear of visibility keeps countless people from expressing their authentic selves, not just in creative pursuits, but in all areas of life. Overcoming this fear requires understanding that creating for the sake of creating, for the joy of expression and the discovery of what wants to come through you, is inherently valuable regardless of anyone else's response. The false self creates for external validation, to prove its worth, to gain admiration, or to meet others' expectations. The authentic self creates because not creating would be a betrayal of its nature. Expression becomes a need, not a strategy for getting something from others. This shift from creating for external validation to creating for authentic expression is liberating because it frees you from the exhausting work of trying to control how others respond. You can share your work without needing everyone to love it. You can express yourself without requiring approval. You can take creative risks without being devastated if they don't succeed. Your creativity becomes an act of self-honoring rather than a performance designed to elicit certain responses from an audience. Living creatively also means bringing creativity to problems and challenges rather than just doing what you've always done or what everyone else does. When you face a difficulty, instead of immediately looking for the conventional solution, you can ask yourself what creative response wants to emerge. What if there's a way of addressing this that no one has thought of? What if my unique perspective and skills allow me to approach this differently? This creative problem solving is actually your authentic self engaging with life rather than your conditioned self applying familiar formulas. The creative imperative isn't about becoming an artist, though you might. It's about recognizing that your life itself is your greatest creative work. Every choice you make, every relationship you engage in, every challenge you face is an opportunity to create something that expresses your authentic nature. When you approach your life as a canvas rather than a script, you move from reproducing patterns to generating something genuinely new. This is when your life becomes interesting, not just to you, but to others, because they're encountering someone who's actually alive and responsive rather than someone going through programmed motions. Chapter 9: The Spiritual Dimension, Beyond Personal Identity. The inner revolution ultimately leads beyond the personal self entirely into what many wisdom traditions call spiritual awakening. This isn't about adopting religious beliefs or joining spiritual communities, though it might include those. It's about recognizing that your authentic self isn't just a more genuine version of your personality. It's the awareness that existed before your personality formed and will continue after your personality dissolves. This recognition fundamentally transforms your relationship to everything, including suffering, meaning, and death itself. Most people live entirely identified with their psychological self, the collection of thoughts, feelings, memories, and personality traits that seem to define who they are. The inner revolution begins by distinguishing between your authentic self and your false self, between who you really are and who you were conditioned to be. But at a certain point, the journey reveals something even more profound. Even your authentic personal self is a construction, a temporary expression of something much vaster that can't be captured by any identity or concept. This recognition often arrives as a spontaneous experience of what's called non-dual awareness. The usual sense of being a separate self located inside your body, looking out at a world of separate objects, suddenly dissolves. The boundaries that seemed so solid and real are revealed as conceptual overlays on an undivided field of experiencing. There's seeing but no separate seer. There's thinking but no separate thinker. There's experiencing but no separate experiencer. What you've been calling I is recognized as a thought among other thoughts, not the fundamental reality you took it to be. These experiences can be disorienting, even frightening, because they challenge the most basic assumption you've held since early childhood, that you're a separate entity fundamentally distinct from everything else. But they're also profoundly liberating because they reveal that the separate self you've been defending and trying to perfect is actually an illusion, a useful fiction that allows functioning in the world, but not the ultimate truth of what you are. Spiritual teacher Adyashanti describes this realization as the end of separation, not as a concept, but as a lived recognition that the consciousness looking out through your eyes is the same consciousness expressing through every form, every person, every phenomenon. What you've been calling your awareness isn't personal. It's the universal awareness temporarily localized in this particular body-mind. This recognition doesn't mean your personality disappears or that you become detached from life. It means you recognize your personality as a role you're playing rather than who you fundamentally are. You can still have preferences, pursue goals, and engage in relationships, but there's less existential weight to it all because you're no longer convinced that your personal survival and success are the ultimate meaning of existence. From this perspective, the inner revolution is recognized as the dissolving of the illusion that you were ever separate from your authentic self. There was never a false self that needed to be destroyed and a true self that needed to be discovered. There was only the play of consciousness taking itself to be limited when its nature is actually limitless. This spiritual dimension doesn't negate the psychological work of distinguishing authentic from conditioned. In fact, it provides the context that makes that work truly effective. When you're identified with your psychological self, trying to become more authentic can become another project for the ego, another way the separate self tries to perfect itself. But when you recognize that even your authentic personality is a temporary expression of something infinite, the whole endeavor relaxes. You can engage in the work of living authentically without making it so serious, without believing that your personal transformation is the ultimate point. Many spiritual traditions emphasize the importance of what's called the witness or observer, the aspect of awareness that can observe your thoughts, feelings, and personality without being identified with them. Developing this witness consciousness is crucial because it creates space between you and your conditioned patterns. Instead of being your thoughts, you become the awareness that notices thoughts arising. Instead of being your emotions, you become the space in which emotions appear and dissolve. This witness position allows you to engage with your psychological material without being overwhelmed by it. But even the witness is not the final realization. At a deeper level, there's the recognition that the witness and the witnessed are not two separate things. The awareness observing thoughts is not fundamentally different from the thoughts themselves. Both are expressions of the same unified field of consciousness. This recognition dissolves the subtle dualism that can develop when you identify as the witness, creating a sense of being a detached observer separate from life. True non-dual realization includes everything without positioning yourself as separate from or transcendent to any aspect of experience. This spiritual dimension profoundly affects how you relate to the challenges and suffering that are inevitable in human life. When you're identified with your personal self, suffering feels like a mistake, a problem that shouldn't be happening. You're constantly trying to avoid pain and create only pleasant experiences. But from a more expansive perspective, suffering is recognized as an inherent aspect of existence and form, not something wrong that needs to be fixed, but part of the complete picture of what it means to be alive. This doesn't mean becoming passive or not addressing suffering when you can. It means recognizing that the resistance to suffering often creates more suffering than the original pain did. When you can allow difficulty to be present without adding the layer of, "this shouldn't be happening," suffering often transforms into just sensation and emotion that moves through and completes, rather than creating prolonged psychological torment. The spiritual perspective also addresses the existential questions that haunt most people. What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What happens when I die? These questions are typically approached from the perspective of the personal self-seeking answers that will make it feel secure or significant. But from the spiritual dimension, these questions dissolve rather than getting answered. Meaning isn't something you find or create. It's the nature of existence itself when you're not filtering it through the lens of personal concern. Chapter 10. Integration. The daily practice of authentic living. Understanding. The nature of conditioning. The architecture of the false self. And even having spiritual insights doesn't automatically translate into living authentically day by day. The inner revolution requires ongoing practice, conscious choice, and patience with yourself as you gradually establish new patterns that align with your authentic nature. This is where many people fail. They have profound realizations, but don't know how to integrate them into ordinary life. So they either remain split between their insights and their behavior, or they dismiss the insights as temporary experiences that don't apply to real life. Integration begins with establishing daily practices that support your connection to your authentic self. These don't have to be elaborate or time-consuming, but they do need to be consistent. A simple morning practice might include a few minutes of meditation or quiet sitting, checking in with your body to notice what's present, setting an intention to respond from authenticity rather than conditioning throughout the day, and perhaps journaling to process whatever's alive in your awareness. The specific practices matter less than the consistency of taking time to connect with yourself before you're pulled into the demands and distractions of daily life. Throughout the day, the practice becomes one of noticing when you're operating from conditioning versus authenticity. This requires developing what Buddhists call mindfulness, a moment-to-moment awareness of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. When you notice yourself about to perform a conditioned response, giving the answer you think someone wants to hear rather than your authentic response, or forcing yourself to do something because you should rather than because it aligns with your values, you have a choice point. You can continue with the conditioned pattern, or you can pause and choose differently. These choice points are where transformation actually happens. Not in the dramatic moments of insight, but in the thousands of small decisions you make each day about whether to be authentic or to perform. whether to honor your needs or to abandon yourself, whether to speak your truth or to say what's safe. Each time you choose authenticity over conditioning, you're strengthening new neural pathways and weakening old ones. You're literally rewiring your brain to make authentic responding more automatic and conditioned responding less so. But this process isn't linear, and it's important to have realistic expectations. You will continue to fall into conditioned patterns. You will catch yourself after you've already said yes when you meant no, after you've already performed instead of being real, after you've already abandoned yourself to maintain comfort or avoid conflict. This isn't failure. It's part of the process. The inner revolution isn't about perfect authenticity. It's about gradually increasing the percentage of time you're able to catch yourself and choose differently, and decreasing the time you spend lost in conditioning before you notice. Self-compassion is essential for this integration phase. Most people have been trained to be harsh with themselves, to judge their failures, and berate themselves for not changing faster. But this self-criticism is itself a conditioned pattern that needs to be released. Your authentic self doesn't relate to your struggles with criticism. It relates with understanding, patience, and compassion. When you notice yourself falling into old patterns, the authentic response isn't, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I get this right?" It's, "Of course this is challenging. I'm working against decades of conditioning. It makes sense that it takes time and repeated practice to establish new ways of being." Integration also requires finding or creating environments and relationships that support your authenticity. If you're surrounded by people and systems that demand conformity and punish authentic expression, maintaining your commitment to the inner revolution will be much more difficult. This doesn't mean you have to leave every challenging situation, but it does mean consciously cultivating spaces where you can be yourself and where your growth is supported rather than undermined. This might mean joining communities of people who are also committed to authentic living, working with a therapist or coach who understands this journey, or simply being more selective about who you spend time with and what you expose yourself to. Another crucial aspect of integration is learning to handle the consequences of authentic living. When you start being yourself, some people won't like it. They might prefer the version of you that was more accommodating, more predictable, or more focused on their needs. They might feel threatened by your growth or judge your choices. Learning to remain grounded in your authentic self while others react negatively is one of the most challenging aspects of this journey. It requires what psychologist David Richo calls the strength to be disliked, the capacity to let others have their responses without abandoning yourself to manage their feelings. This doesn't mean being inconsiderate or deliberately provocative. It means recognizing that you cannot control how others respond to your authenticity, and trying to do so will require you to go back to performing and abandoning yourself. You can be thoughtful about how you express yourself. You can consider others' perspectives, and you can make choices that balance your needs with the needs of relationships and systems you're part of. But ultimately, you have to be willing to be misunderstood, criticized, and rejected by some people as the price of being authentic. The alternative is abandoning yourself, which is too high a price to pay. Integration also involves recognizing that different contexts may call for different expressions of your authentic self. Being authentic doesn't mean being the same way in every situation or sharing everything with everyone. It means being genuinely yourself within the particular context you're in. The way you show up with intimate friends might be different from how you show up at work, and both can be authentic. The key distinction is whether you're modulating your expression consciously as a skillful choice or whether you're automatically performing because you're afraid of what would happen if you were yourself. The daily practice of authentic living also requires developing the capacity to live with uncertainty. Your conditioned self prefers predictability, clear outcomes, and guaranteed results. But authentic living often requires making choices without knowing how they'll turn out. Trusting your inner guidance even when it doesn't make logical sense, and being willing to course correct when you discover your authentic path leads somewhere different than you anticipated. This tolerance for uncertainty grows with practice, but it never becomes completely comfortable. That's okay. Discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's often a sign you're growing beyond your familiar limitations. Chapter 11. Purpose, Beyond Achievement. The question of meaning. One of the most profound shifts that occurs during the inner revolution is in your understanding of purpose and meaning. The conditioned self typically seeks meaning through achievement, acquisition, status, or impact. It wants to know what it should be doing with its life, what goals it should be pursuing, what will make its existence significant. But these questions, when asked from conditioning, can never be satisfactorily answered because they're based on the assumption that meaning is something you create through your accomplishments or something you find through discovering your special calling. The authentic self relates to purpose and meaning completely differently. From this perspective, meaning isn't something you create or find. It's what you experience when you're being yourself and expressing your nature freely. Purpose isn't a specific goal or calling that you must discover and fulfill. It's the simple fact of being fully alive and engaged with whatever your life brings. This shift from doing to being, from accomplishing to expressing, from finding your purpose to being your purpose, is subtle but revolutionary. Most people's search for purpose is actually a search for justification. They want to prove that their existence matters, that they're valuable, that their life is worth something. This search is driven by a core wound of not enoughness, a belief installed by conditioning that they need to earn their right to exist through what they produce or contribute. But this wound can never be healed through achievement because the belief that you're not enough is false to begin with. No amount of accomplishment can make you valuable because you were never not valuable. Your worth isn't based on what you do. It's inherent in the fact of your existence. When you recognize this, the frantic energy that often drives the search for purpose dissolves. You're no longer trying to prove something or create significance through your choices. You're free to engage with life from curiosity and aliveness rather than from the desperate need to matter. This doesn't make you passive or unmotivated. It often makes you more effective because you're no longer exhausting yourself trying to force outcomes that will prove your worth. You're responding to what genuinely calls to you, what energizes you, what you're naturally drawn to. And that authentic engagement is far more sustainable and fulfilling than driven achievement. The question, "What's my purpose?" when asked from authenticity becomes, "What wants to be expressed through me? What is my life asking of me right now? What do I genuinely care about beneath all the conditioned shoulds and supposed tos?" These questions don't have single definitive answers that you discover and then follow for the rest of your life. They're ongoing inquiries that yield different responses in different seasons and contexts. Your purpose isn't a fixed destination. It's an evolving expression of your unique way of being alive in the world. This evolutionary understanding of purpose is liberating because it frees you from the belief that you must figure out the answer to your life before you can begin living fully. You don't have to know where you're ultimately going. You just have to be willing to take the next authentic step and then the next one, trusting that a meaningful path will emerge through the walking itself rather than needing to see the entire route mapped out in advance. This is fundamentally different from the conditioned approach, which wants certainty, guarantees, and comprehensive plans before committing to anything. Many people resist this uncertainty because they've been taught that not knowing your purpose is a problem that needs to be solved. Entire industries exist to help people find their passion, discover their calling, or identify their mission statement, as if meaning is a hidden treasure that requires the right map and tools to locate. But meaning isn't hidden and doesn't need to be found. It's present in every moment when you're fully engaged with what's actually happening, rather than distracted by thoughts about whether this moment is significant enough. Viktor Frankl's work on meaning-making in extreme circumstances reveals that humans can find meaning in any situation, even in suffering, when they choose to interpret their experience in ways that connect them to something larger than personal comfort or success. But he also noted that meaning can't be pursued directly. It emerges as a byproduct of dedication to something beyond yourself, whether that's love for another person, commitment to a cause, or creative expression of your unique gifts. The more you chase meaning, the more elusive it becomes. The more you simply live authentically and contribute what's yours to give, the more meaningful your life becomes without you having to create meaning deliberately. This doesn't mean authentic living is aimless or without direction. It means your direction emerges from within rather than being imposed from without. You might feel drawn to particular kinds of work, relationships, creative expression, or contribution. These aren't random. They're expressions of your authentic nature finding its way into the world. Following these authentic pulls, even when they don't make conventional sense or promise conventional success, is how your unique purpose manifests. The authentic self's relationship to contribution is also different from the conditioned self's. The false self often wants to contribute in ways that will be recognized and validated. It wants to make a big impact, to be remembered, to matter in ways that are visible and acknowledged. The authentic self contributes because it has something to give, because expression is natural, because it can't not share what's moving through it. Whether anyone notices or appreciates this contribution is secondary to the simple satisfaction of expressing and giving what's yours to share. This shift from contribution for recognition to contribution for its own sake is deeply freeing because it removes the constant evaluation of whether what you're doing is enough, whether you're making enough of a difference, whether your impact is significant enough. You're no longer measuring yourself against some imagined standard of meaningful contribution. You're simply offering what's yours to give and trusting that it will reach whoever needs it, even if you never know about the impact you've had. Chapter 12. The Ongoing Revolution. Living as Continuous. Becoming. The inner revolution is not a destination you reach where the work is done and you finally arrived at your authentic self. It's an ongoing process of becoming, evolving, and deepening, that continues throughout your entire life. This understanding is crucial because many people approach personal transformation with the unconscious expectation that they'll reach a state of completion where they're fully healed, permanently authentic, and no longer challenged by their conditioning. This expectation sets them up for disappointment and often causes them to give up when they realize that growth is not a linear path to a fixed endpoint. Your authentic self is not a static identity that you uncover and then simply maintain. It's a dynamic process of responding to life freshly in each moment, of allowing yourself to change and grow as your circumstances evolve, of remaining open to discovering aspects of yourself that you didn't know existed. The moment you decide you figured out who you really are and try to fix that identity in place, you've created a new form of false self. You've just replaced one rigid identity with another one that happens to feel more genuine. True authenticity requires fluidity, the capacity to be different things in different moments, to contain contradictions without needing to resolve them, to evolve beyond who you were yesterday without betraying yourself. This ongoing nature of the inner revolution means you must develop what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset, not just about your abilities, but about your very identity. You're not trying to become a finished product. You're engaging in continuous development, where each stage of growth creates the foundation for the next stage. The person you are at 30 is appropriately different from who you were at 20, and the person you'll be at 50 will be different still. Trying to remain fixed in any version of yourself, even an authentic version, is actually a form of resistance to life's natural evolutionary impulse. One of the most important aspects of living as continuous becoming is developing comfort with outgrowing versions of yourself that you once thought were permanent. Relationships, careers, beliefs, identities, and ways of being that once fit perfectly may no longer serve who you're becoming. This doesn't mean those earlier versions were false or mistakes. They were necessary stages in your development. But clinging to them once you've outgrown them creates suffering and stagnation. Learning to let go of who you've been to make space for who you're becoming is an essential skill for authentic living. This requires what Buddhists call non-attachment, but not in the sense of not caring or remaining emotionally distant. Non-attachment means holding everything lightly, being fully engaged and present with your current experience while remaining open to its inevitable transformation. You can love deeply while knowing that all relationships change. You can commit fully to your current path while remaining open to new directions. You can embody an identity while recognizing it's temporary. This paradoxical capacity to be both fully committed and simultaneously unattached is the mark of mature authenticity. The ongoing revolution also means recognizing that you will continue to discover shadow material, conditioned patterns, and limitations throughout your life. No matter how much inner work you do, new layers will emerge as you encounter new challenges and opportunities. A pattern that was completely unconscious at 30 might become visible at 40 when you're in different circumstances. An aspect of your shadow that you successfully ignored while single might become impossible to avoid in intimate partnership. A limitation that didn't matter in one career might become crucial when you move to different work. This ongoing discovery is not a sign that you're doing it wrong or that your previous work was inadequate. It's simply how psychological and spiritual development works. You can only become conscious of what you're ready to integrate. Earlier, Work creates the foundation for deeper work, which creates the foundation for even deeper work. There's no final clearing of all your issues that results in a permanently perfected self. There's only deepening self-awareness and expanding capacity to work with whatever arises. Living as continuous becoming also requires developing patience and compassion for your own process. In a culture that values speed, efficiency, and dramatic transformations, the slow, gradual, often imperceptible nature of authentic growth can feel frustrating. You want to be done with your patterns, healed from your wounds, and established in your authentic self right now. But real transformation happens in its own time, according to its own logic, and cannot be forced or rushed without creating new problems. Some changes happen suddenly in breakthrough moments where everything shifts in an instant. But most growth happens slowly through the accumulation of small choices, gradual insights, and barely noticeable shifts that only become apparent when you look back over months or years and realize how different you are from who you were. Learning to trust this slow process, to value the small daily choices as much as the dramatic breakthroughs, and to remain committed even when progress feels invisible, is essential for sustaining the inner revolution over a lifetime. The ongoing nature of the journey also means cultivating what Zen practitioners call beginner's mind, the capacity to approach each moment with fresh awareness rather than through the filter of everything you think you already know. Even as you develop deep understanding and extensive experience with your inner landscape, there's always more to discover. The moment you think you've figured yourself out completely, you've stopped looking, and you've probably missed something important. Remaining curious, open, and willing to be surprised by yourself keeps the inner revolution alive and prevents it from calcifying into a new form of rigidity. Another crucial aspect of living as continuous becoming is recognizing that your outer life will need to change as your inner life transforms. Many people do deep inner work while trying to keep their external circumstances exactly the same. They want to become authentic without disrupting their relationships, their career, their lifestyle, or their social position. But this is rarely possible. As you change internally, what you need and want from life inevitably shifts. Relationships that once felt satisfying may become constraining. Work that once felt meaningful may lose its appeal. Environments that once felt comfortable may start feeling suffocating. These shifts are not problems to be avoided. They're signs that your inner revolution is working, that you're actually changing, rather than just understanding different concepts while remaining behaviorally the same. Having the courage to make external changes that align with your internal transformation is where many people get stuck. They've done the inner work, they've had the insights, but they won't take the outward steps that would bring their life into alignment with their authentic self, because those steps feel too risky, too disruptive, or too uncertain. But without this external alignment, the inner revolution remains incomplete. You end up living a split existence where your inner life is evolving, but your outer life remains locked in old patterns. This split creates enormous stress because you're constantly having to suppress your authentic impulses to maintain circumstances that no longer fit. Eventually, this tension either forces change or creates breakdown. Learning to make conscious, proactive changes that align your external life with your internal evolution is far less painful than waiting for circumstances to force change through crisis. Living as continuous becoming also requires developing a different relationship to failure and mistakes. When you're trying to reach a fixed destination or become a perfected version of yourself, failures feel like setbacks that prove you're not making progress. But when you understand yourself as continuously evolving, failures become feedback. They're information about what doesn't work, opportunities to discover your actual limits rather than your imagined ones, and invitations to adjust your approach rather than evidence that you should give up. This shift from seeing failure as judgment to seeing it as information is profoundly liberating. It removes the paralyzing fear of making mistakes that keeps so many people from taking risks, trying new things, or expressing themselves authentically. When you're not trying to maintain an image of perfection or prove your worth through success, you can experiment freely. Some experiments will work beautifully. Others will fail spectacularly. Both provide valuable learning that contributes to your ongoing evolution. The inner revolution, as continuous becoming, also means recognizing that you're never working on yourself alone. Your growth affects everyone you're in relationship with and ripples out into the larger systems you're part of. As you become more authentic, you give others permission to be more authentic. As you heal patterns from your family system, you're not just healing yourself, you're changing the entire field in ways that can affect generations. As you live from your true nature, you're contributing to the collective evolution of consciousness, even if you never speak about it or draw attention to it. This understanding can shift your motivation for doing inner work. Instead of seeing it as a personal project focused on your individual happiness, you can recognize it as a contribution to the well-being of the whole. Every person who breaks free from unconscious conditioning, who lives authentically despite cultural pressure to conform, who chooses growth over comfort, is making it slightly easier for others to do the same. Your inner revolution is your gift to a world that desperately needs people who are awake, authentic, and alive. Chapter 13. The Freedom That Remains. Your life begins now. After everything you've learned about conditioning, authenticity, embodiment, relationships, creativity, spirituality, and continuous becoming, there comes a moment when you must step fully into the life that's actually yours. Not the life you think you should have, not the life others expect from you, not the life that would prove your worth or make you significant. The life that emerges when you stop performing and simply be who you are. This is the ultimate fruit of the inner revolution, not a perfected self, but a free human being who responds to life authentically and accepts the consequences of that authenticity. This freedom is not the absence of challenges, limitations, or difficulties. You will still face loss, disappointment, pain, and uncertainty. Your conditioning will still activate in stressful situations. Your old patterns will still appear, especially when you're tired, overwhelmed, or triggered. But the quality of your relationship to all of this changes fundamentally. You're no longer at war with your experience, no longer trying to force yourself to be someone you're not, no longer exhausting yourself, maintaining facades that require constant energy to uphold. The freedom that remains when you've committed to the inner revolution is the freedom to be ordinary. Not ordinary in the sense of mediocre or unremarkable, but ordinary in the sense of simply being yourself, without the pressure to be extraordinary, exceptional, or special. The false self is always trying to stand out, to be more, to prove its significance. The authentic self is content to be exactly what it is, contributing what's naturally it's to give, without needing recognition or validation in return. This ordinariness is actually profound because it's so rare in a culture that constantly demands that you be more, do more, and become more than you currently are. To simply be yourself, to express your nature without apology, to take up the space you need without shrinking or inflating, to matter because you exist rather than because of what you achieve. This is a radical act. It's revolutionary precisely because it refuses to participate in the game of comparison, competition, and constant self-improvement that keeps most people trapped in performance and disconnected from their authentic experience. Living from this freedom means making choices based on what's true for you, rather than on what will look good, what others will approve of, or what promises security. It means pursuing work that genuinely interests you even if it's not prestigious or lucrative. It means being in relationships where you can be yourself, even if they're not the relationships that impress others. It means living in ways that align with your values even when those ways are unconventional or misunderstood. Every choice becomes an opportunity to either honor yourself or abandon yourself, and you become increasingly committed to the former, even when it's uncomfortable. This commitment to self-honoring is not selfishness. It's actually the foundation of genuine contribution, because you can only give authentically from fullness, never from depletion. When you're constantly abandoning yourself to meet others' expectations or to maintain appearances, you have nothing genuine to offer. You're giving from obligation, manipulation, or the need for validation. And that kind of giving depletes everyone involved. But when you're living from your authentic self, nourishing your own needs, and expressing your nature freely, you have overflow to genuinely share with others. The freedom that remains also includes the freedom to change your mind, to evolve beyond positions you once held firmly, to outgrow identities you once thought were permanent. You're no longer imprisoned by consistency, no longer required to remain the person you've always been, just because others expect it. You can acknowledge when something is no longer working for you, even if you once proclaimed it was your passion. You can leave situations you once committed to if staying would require continuous self-betrayal. You can become someone different than you were without needing to justify or explain your evolution to anyone. This doesn't mean being flaky or avoiding genuine commitment. It means distinguishing between commitments made from your authentic self, which you honor deeply, and commitments made from conditioning or pressure, which you're willing to renegotiate or release. It means being honest when you've changed, rather than staying in situations out of guilt, obligation, or the fear of disappointing others. It means trusting that the people who are meant to be in your life will accept your evolution, and that those who can't were probably relating to your false self anyway. Living from authentic freedom also means developing the capacity to be with whatever arises without immediately trying to fix it, change it, or make it different. This is perhaps the deepest form of freedom, the freedom to let life be exactly as it is while still responding appropriately to what you can influence. You can feel sadness without making it a problem that needs to be solved. You can experience fear without believing it means you're doing something wrong. You can sit with uncertainty without frantically trying to create premature clarity. You can be with others' pain without taking responsibility for fixing them. This capacity to be with what is without resistance is what spiritual teachers call acceptance, but it's often misunderstood. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation or passivity. It doesn't mean pretending you like things you don't or staying in situations that harm you. It means acknowledging reality as it actually is, rather than as you wish it were, which is the only place from which effective action can emerge. When you're constantly fighting against what is, you're wasting energy that could be used to respond skillfully. When you accept what is, you can see clearly what's needed and take appropriate action from groundedness rather than reactivity. The inner revolution ultimately reveals that freedom isn't something you achieve or attain. It's what you already are beneath all the layers of conditioning, fear, and performance. You're not trying to become free. You're recognizing the freedom that's always been present and choosing to live from it rather than from the imprisonment of should, must, and supposed to. This recognition transforms everything because you're no longer working towards some future state of liberation. You're claiming the liberation that's available right now in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment. This present moment freedom is accessible anytime you stop, breathe, and come back to what's actually happening rather than the stories you're telling about what's happening. Right now, in this moment, are you actually threatened, or are you thinking about potential threats? Right now, are you actually inadequate, or are you believing thoughts that say you're not enough? Right now, are you actually trapped, or are you choosing not to exercise the freedom that's available? Most of the prison you experience exists in your thoughts about the past and future, not in your present moment reality. As you deepen into this recognition, you discover that the inner revolution was never about becoming someone else. It was about removing everything false so what's real could shine through. It was about questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself so you could discover what's actually true. It was about releasing the exhausting work of maintaining personas so you could rest into the simple beingness that requires no effort at all. You were always free. You just forgot, and the whole journey has been about remembering. Conclusion: your revolution, your life. The inner revolution is not a technique to be mastered or a goal to be achieved. It's a lifelong commitment to living from truth rather than conditioning, from authenticity rather than performance, from presence rather than distraction. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose freedom over imprisonment, to respond from your authentic self rather than your conditioned patterns, to be fully alive rather than sleepwalking through an existence that was never truly yours. You've learned about the prison of conditioning and how it was constructed without your conscious consent. You've explored the architecture of the false self and the mechanisms that keep it in place. You've discovered the importance of embodiment, the complexity of authentic relationships, the necessity of creative expression, and the possibility of spiritual awakening beyond personal identity. You've understood that this is not a linear journey to a fixed destination, but a continuous process of becoming, evolving, and deepening throughout your entire life. But all of this understanding means nothing without action, without the courage to actually live differently. Knowledge alone doesn't free you. Insight without implementation leaves you stuck in the same patterns with slightly more sophisticated explanations for why you're stuck. The inner revolution requires that you take what you've learned and bring it into the messy, complicated, unpredictable reality of your actual life. It requires that you risk being yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, that you honor your truth, even when others disapprove, that you make choices aligned with your authentic nature, even when the outcomes are uncertain. This won't be easy. You'll be going against decades of conditioning, swimming against cultural currents that demand conformity, and disappointing people who preferred the version of you that was more manageable. You'll face your deepest fears about rejection, inadequacy, and loss. You'll encounter internal resistance that masquerades as rationality, telling you all the reasons why being authentic is impractical, irresponsible, or impossible. You'll be tempted countless times to return to familiar patterns because the unknown territory of authentic living feels too risky. But here's what you must understand. The cost of not doing this is far higher than any price you'll pay for becoming yourself. The exhaustion of maintaining facades that don't fit, the depression that comes from living an unlived life, the regret of reaching the end without ever having shown up as yourself. These costs accumulate quietly but devastatingly. Every day you postpone your own authenticity is a day you're not actually living. You're existing in a kind of suspended animation, going through motions that have no real life in them. The inner revolution invites you to stop postponing your life until conditions are perfect, until you're more healed, until you figured everything out, until you feel ready. You will never feel completely ready because stepping into authentic living always involves uncertainty. But you are ready enough right now to take the next honest step, to make the next authentic choice, to honor the next true impulse, and then the next one, and then the next one. This is how revolutions unfold, not through dramatic overnight transformations, but through the accumulation of small, brave choices made consistently over time. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to know where this will lead or how your life will look when you're living authentically. You don't need permission from anyone or validation that you're doing it right. You simply need to begin, to commit to yourself more deeply than you've committed to your conditioning, to care about your own aliveness more than you care about others' comfort with who you are. The world needs you to do this. Not a perfected, healed, completely actualized version of you. The world needs you, the actual you with all your quirks, contradictions, and rough edges. It needs your unique way of seeing, your specific gifts, your particular expression of what it means to be alive. Every person who breaks free from conditioning and lives authentically makes it easier for others to do the same. Your liberation contributes to the liberation of all beings in ways you'll never fully know, but that are absolutely real. So begin now, not tomorrow, not when you're more ready, not after you've read more or understood better. Begin right now with whatever is in front of you. Notice where you're performing and choose authenticity instead. Feel what you're actually feeling instead of what you think you should feel. Say what's true for you instead of what will make everyone comfortable. Take one action that aligns with your authentic self, even if it's imperfect or uncertain, and then another, and then another. This is your inner revolution, your liberation from the prison of conditioning, your return to the authenticity that's always been yours, your life finally and fully lived, from the inside out rather than the outside in. The revolution begins now, in this moment, with this breath, with this choice. Everything you need is already within you. You just need the courage to let it out. Your life is waiting. Not the life you think you should have. Your life. The one that emerges when you stop trying to be who you're not and simply allow yourself to be who you are. This is your invitation, your calling, your birthright. Will you answer it? The choice, as it always has been, is yours.